So this video, we're going to talk about Washington taking office and kind of everything that goes along with, we've got this new government and what is the new president? What is going to happen here? So the new president, he's going to set a lot of precedent and we're going to preview what he does, kind of the big issues that are going to come during his presidency, which is really what the rest of the next few days are going to focus on, is the big issues during his presidency. But today we're going to focus on the example or the precedent that he sets. And so, if to put it into the kind of the academic language, our objective is to understand Washington's role in establishing the presidency. So what is it that he does that helps to establish, the way the nation will run, the way the president will work, and just those things. And as being the first one, he's very aware that everything he does is going to be very important. And so that's what we're going to look at today. And so let's start off just kind of some of the big issues that he faces. What are the big problems that President Washington faces? So he faces, and probably the most important of those is this issue of the economy and paying off the war debt. There's this debt that is just crushing in many ways for the United States. They haven't had a way to bring money in, and so there's this debt that's looming, and there's no way to solve that problem under the old government. And so this new government, they're going to have to decide how that actually works. Now they have a way to do it, but how are they going to implement those things? Then maybe kind of more philosophical problem is, well, how is the authority, this new government, this federal system where we've got power that is shared between the federal government and the state governments, how is that authority of the central government going to be defined? How is it going to be used? How is the president going to operate? How are other people going to operate? And that's a really big issue that's going to come up. Kind of going along with paying off the war debt is creating a stable economic system. How will the nation, what kind of economy will we have? Will it be agricultural economy? Will it be an industrial economy? What role will the government play in encouraging the economy? Will the government get involved in encouraging the economy at all? That's one of the big questions. And then finally, now we have a nation, we have a government that has some power. The British have continued to have forts in the Ohio River Valley. What are we going to do about that? Are we going to be able to do anything about it? So now that we can collect taxes, will we have a military? Will we have a standing military? Or will we continue to depend upon militias? So those are some of the issues that are going to be faced by this first president. And so very similar to the issues that he faces, some of the key problems that I want you to understand that he had there's two types of problems that we think of, two types of issues when we think of a nation. We think of domestic policy, which is what issues and problems at home. And then we think of foreign policy, which is how we relate to other countries. So for example, if we're talking about taxes within a nation, that's domestic policy. If we're talking about a tariff, and putting taxes on other goods coming in from other countries, well, that's kind of both. That kind of straddles the line between foreign policy and domestic policy. And then we talk about, are we going to get involved in somebody else's war? Well, that's foreign policy. And so within the domestic policy and what's going on at home, his big issue was economic stability and how he goes about trying to provide economic stability. That is tied really closely to political parties, because political parties are going to develop almost immediately. As soon as he starts to make decisions, there's going to be people that support it and people that oppose it. And those decisions lead to, two different sides, and those different sides end up being our earliest and first political parties. And not surprisingly, what he decides to do when it regards to other nations and how he wants to handle conflict with other nations is going to also help to create this idea of political parties. And so, his big foreign policy, Washington's big foreign policy, is going to be that of neutrality. In other words, staying neutral in other countries' problems. But even though he wants to stay neutral, that doesn't mean everybody else does. And so that's going to lead to additional division within the United States. So we think about division in our country today. Well, and we talk about how divided we are as a nation. Well, we are divided in many ways, but let's be real clear that there has been disagreement and division within the nation from the very beginning. From the very beginning of the decisions that the president has to make, that's going to divide people. They're not going to agree on the best solutions. And that starts with the very first president. So Washington certainly faces this as the first president, and how he handles that is going to set an example for the future. Now, finally, this one says first president sets the precedent, and kind of here is the key to what I want you to know about this first video here. Most of his actions, it says, set a precedent for future presidents, and so you can see there the definition there: earlier action that is considered an example for future actions in similar circumstances. So when you hear the word precedent, you should think of an example. So President Washington is setting an example. And everything he does, he recognizes that he's setting an example for future presidents and way things will be held. And I've put a few different images here. Obviously, Washington is paramount in all of these pictures because he is the first president. He is in charge. What he does is so important. But he sets several precedents. One of them is, and I'm going to actually go to the second one on the list there. It says executive cabinet. He chooses people like Alexander Hamilton over here, and I had to put a little, Lin-Manuel here because he, obviously he's famous for the play, the musical about Hamilton, so I had to throw him in there as well. But the division between Hamilton here and Jefferson up here is going to really be a key to one of the issues in Washington's presidency. But he picks people that he thinks will be great for his cabinet. In other words, advisors. So Alexander Hamilton is especially good at dealing with issues on finance, and so he makes him his Secretary of Treasury. Thomas Jefferson has been dealing with other nations, in particular France, and so he makes him his Secretary of State. And so he puts people in charge of these big problems that are brilliant and have opinions and strong opinions, and they don't even have to agree with one another, because Hamilton and Jefferson didn't agree on really anything at all, but he still picks them for his cabinet. And so he sets that example for future presidents as well. We've already talked about this idea of neutrality. He proclaims himself the United States neutral in the affairs of other nations, but perhaps the most important precedent he sets, and this is just so key, the first president of this new nation where it is so essential that the people have a voice, where we're talking about democracy, he sets the example. He does not stay in office forever. He could have been elected and elected and elected. There's nothing in the Constitution that stopped him from running for a third term. He chose to not run for that third term. Just as when he was general in the Continental Army, he steps down. He doesn't come to, take charge and set himself up as ruler then. Once again, he's been elected president, but he steps down. He steps away from power. And this is what is probably the preeminent, the most important thing about Washington and what he does. Time and time again, he has given positions of power, and he steps away from those positions of power while he still could keep power. In other words, he relinquishes power to others. He sets that example that we aren't a nation where once you're in power, you fight forever to hold on to power, but you let others take the reins and have power as well. And this is so essential to understanding Washington and who he was and his why he is so revered by many, is this recognition that keeping power forever is a bad idea. It's what Europe has done. It's what kings do. It's not what elected officials do. Elected officials step down. Elected officials don't stay in power forever. And he sets that example as the president, as our first president. So after 2 terms, he retires once again and returns to Mount Vernon, his home. So that is just a quick preview of our first president and the issues that will face him during his presidency and the example he sets for future presidents.